Welcome back to the Rise Up podcast, where we dive into the fascinating world of personal growth and development. Today, we're tackling a common frustration for language learners: the ability to understand a foreign language, but struggling to speak it. Joining me today is Alex, a language expert and polyglot who has mastered several languages. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to shed some light on this topic.
So let's start with the basic. Why is it that so many people can comprehend a language through reading or listening, but find it difficult to express themselves verbally?
It's a complex issue with several factors at play. First, we need to understand the difference between receptive and productive language skills. Receptive skills involve understanding what you hear or read, while productive skills are about speaking and writing. These skills develop at different rates and require different types of practice.
Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. When we learn a language, we often start by absorbing vocabulary and grammar through reading and listening. This builds our receptive skills, allowing us to recognize words and understand their meaning in context. However, speaking requires us to actively retrieve words from our memory, formulate sentences, and articulate them correctly. This process demands more cognitive effort and practice.
It's like the difference between understanding a recipe and actually cooking the dish, right?
Exactly. You can read a recipe and understand the steps, but that doesn't mean you can automatically create a delicious meal. You need to practice the skills involved in cooking to get good at it.
So what are some of the other reasons why people struggle with speaking?
One major factor is fear and anxiety. Many learners are afraid of making mistakes, being judged, or not sounding fluent. This can create a mental block that prevents them from speaking freely.
I can definitely relate to that. I remember feeling terrified the first time I tried to speak Spanish with a native speaker.
It's a common experience, but the truth is, making mistakes is an essential part of language learning. We learn from our errors and gradually improve our pronunciation, vocabulary, and grammar.
So how can we overcome this fear and start speaking more confidently?
One effective strategy is to find a supportive and encouraging learning environment. This could be a language exchange partner, a tutor, or a language class where you feel comfortable practicing your speaking skills.
What about those who don't have access to those resources?
There are plenty of ways to practice speaking on your own. You can talk to yourself in the target language, record yourself speaking, or use language learning apps that offer speaking exercises. The key is to find opportunities to use the language actively.
Are there any other tips you can share for improving speaking skills?
Absolutely. One important tip is to focus on fluency rather than perfection. Don't worry too much about making mistakes or sounding like a native speaker. Instead, aim to communicate your message clearly and effectively.
That's great advice. I think many learners get caught up in trying to sound perfect, which can hold them back.
Another helpful tip is to immerse yourself in the language as much as possible. Listen to podcasts, watch movies, read books, and try to find opportunities to speak with native speakers. The more you expose yourself to the language, the more natural it will become.
Immersion is definitely key. I've found that even small things like changing the language on my phone or listening to music in the target language can make a big difference.
Absolutely. It's all about creating a language-rich environment for yourself.
So, what would you say to someone who feels discouraged because they can understand but not speak a language?
I would tell them not to give up. Speaking is a skill that takes time and practice to develop. It's important to be patient with yourself, celebrate your progress, and focus on the joy of communication.
That's a wonderful message. I think many learners need to hear that.
I also want to emphasize that everyone learns differently. Some people are naturally more inclined towards speaking, while others may find it more challenging. The key is to find what works for you and create a learning plan that suits your individual needs and preferences.
That's so important. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to language learning.
Exactly. And remember, language learning is a journey, not a destination. It's about enjoying the process of discovery and connecting with other cultures.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That's all for today's episode of the Rise Up podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. We'll be back next week with another inspiring episode. Until then, keep rising up.